Okay, so here we are on day 3 of Unit 5, and number 1 says if n does not, or I'm sorry, if n is greater than 0, the expression is equal to. So they're telling you that n is greater than 0 because our problem is a fraction, okay? And if n was equal to 0, it would make it undefined, okay? And so they're telling you greater than 0 so that we can still do the math. You guys don't know this yet, but when we do a radical, we cannot have a negative number underneath our, we can if it's a cube root, but can't if it's a square root or an even root. We cannot take the even root of a negative number. Okay, so that's why they're telling you that. Nothing that you have to worry about. All we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and rewrite this. First thing we don't like about it is that negative. Okay. And what that negative is going to do is cause the 1 to go downstairs, the n to come upstairs. When 1 is downstairs, we don't really need to write it. And so we could just rewrite this as n, okay, to the positive 2/3. All right, so n changed floors, and therefore our exponent changes sign. Okay, and then we're going to go ahead and rewrite that so that it's a radical. N's going to go underneath, 3 is going to go in the crack because it's on the bottom, and our square will stay on the n. And we're going to look for our correct answer, and we see that it is number 3. Okay, number 2. All right, so the same thing is going to happen here with this negative. It's going to cause our numerator to change into the denominator and our denominator to come up into the numerator. All right, and so we're going to have m to the 1/3 upstairs, okay, and m to the 2nd downstairs. And our exponent will change to a positive 1/2. Okay. All right, so then what that means is that positive 1/2 has to be used on both of our bases of m. And so that's going to be m to the 1/3 to the 1/2. And it's going to cause us to have m squared on the bottom raised to the 1/2. Okay. When we have an exponent raised to an exponent, we should know by now that we multiply them, same on the top and on the bottom. And when we do that on the top, that's going to become m to the 1/6. And on the bottom, that will become m to the 1st. Okay. What we're going to do now is we're going to go ahead and divide here, except we subtract our exponents. So I suggest using your calculator, but you're going to type in 1/6 in parentheses minus our 1 on the bottom. Okay. When you get an ugly decimal, math frac, and that's going to end up equaling -5/6. So this will be m to the -5/6. Okay. Which you see is not an answer. So we're going to go ahead and change it to be a positive exponent. So it'll be 1 over m to the 5/6. That is also not an answer. And so now we're going to change it to be a radical. So we have 1 over, m goes underneath, 6 is on the bottom, so 6 goes in the crack, and 5 stays on the m. And hopefully that answer is there, and it is, and it's number 2. Okay, so a little bit tricky. All right, let's take a look at some of these other ones down here. It says simplify and express in 2 equivalent forms using properties of rational exponents. All right, so in number 3, we always want a cleaned up top and a cleaned up bottom before we do any dividing or subtracting of the exponents. So in number 3, hopefully you guys see that that's an exponent raised to an exponent, and we're going to go ahead and multiply them. Just do it in your calculator. So 5/4 in parentheses times 3. If it's ugly, math frac it, and it'll get you 15/4. Okay. On the bottom, oops, I don't know why I wrote an M. I guess I was stuck on the last one. So it's an X. Let me erase that real quick. Okay. And then let's call that x to the 15/4. And then on the bottom would be x to the 7/8. If I left it as an m, I wouldn't be able to do the math in this next step. All right, so now that our operation is division, we're going to go ahead and subtract our exponents. So in your calculator, you're just going to type in 15/4 in parentheses minus 7/8 in parentheses. Okay. If you get an ugly answer, math frac it, and it should come out to be 23/8. Okay. And so coming back up here, when we divide this, This will give us x to the 23/8. And that's a great answer. But the question is asking for two equivalent forms using properties of rational exponents. And so our other one, we will rewrite it as our radical. So we'll go ahead and say radical with our x, 8's on the bottom, so 8's going to go in the crack, and 23 will stay on the x. Okay? And that is equivalent. So there are our two answers. Okay? All right, number 4. In order to multiply these together, since we don't have properties for radicals, but we do have properties for exponents, we're going to change them back into their exponent form. Okay. What we have to do is remember what's in the crack of a square root, and hopefully you guys remember that there's an invisible 2 in there and a little invisible 1 here, and so we can say that this is x to the 1/2 times, there's a little 1 here, and so that is x to the 1/3. Remember what's in the crack goes on the bottom. All right. And now that we have that, we could go ahead and say that our property, when we're multiplying, is to add our exponents. And we're going to add them in our calculator. So we're going to have 1/2 in parentheses plus our exponent of 1/3. Okay? And if you get an ugly decimal, just math frac it, and it should come out to be 5/6. And so we're going to go back up and say that this is x to the 5/6. And that's going to be one of our answers, but they want two equivalent forms. So we're going to go ahead and rewrite it as a radical with x underneath. 6 is on the bottom, so 6 goes in the crack, and 5 stays on. And there is our other form. All right, number 5. Oh, let's see. What do we got here? So we're going to go ahead and rewrite this. We don't have properties for radicals. We only have properties for exponents. So we're going to go back to exponential form here instead of our radical form. And so we're going to go ahead and say that this is x to the 7/3. 3's in the crack. 3 goes on the bottom. Okay? And on the bottom, there is a 2 in the crack. And so that would be x to the 5/2. 2's in the crack. It goes on the bottom. Okay. All right. So now that we are dividing, we are going to subtract our exponents. And again, we're going to use our calculator. So in our calculator, we'll type in 7/3 in parentheses minus our exponent of 5/2. If you get something ugly, just math frac it, and it should come out to be negative 1/6. Okay. So we'll go back and we'll say that this is x to the negative 1/6. To 1. Okay. And that is a good answer. Okay. And with this one, we can actually get 3 different answers. All right. So we're also going to go ahead and rewrite that as 1 over x to the positive 1/6. And we're going to go one step further and also say that this is 1 over radical x underneath. 6 is on the bottom. 6 goes in the crack, and I don't need the 1 there unless I want to write it. Okay. All 3 of those are great equivalent forms. Okay. Let's go ahead and see what they have in 6, 7, and 8. It looks like they're getting a little bit fancier. Just remember your rules and your properties. Okay. So the top looks nice, but the bottom does not. So we're going to keep the top as x to the 5/3. But it seems like the bottom needs a little cleaned up. Not much I can do with that x squared, but I can take that radical and I can rewrite that. Just remember that there's a little 1 here, and so that would be x to the 1/4. 4 is in the crack, 4 goes on the bottom. Okay. I'm going to keep the x to the 5/3 on top for a minute, not do anything with that until I clean up the bottom. Okay. Again, your operation is multiplication, and so the exponents get added. So you're going to take an exponent of 2, and you're going to add the exponent of 1/4 to it. Okay, which is just 2.25, and you can math frac it, and it will go back into a fraction, and it'll be 9/4. And going back to our problem, this will be x to the 9/4. All right, now that the top is clean, the bottom is clean, now we can go ahead and divide. But when we divide, we subtract exponents. So we're going to have 5/3 in parentheses minus our exponent of 9/4. Okay. And if it gives you something ugly in your calculator when you subtract them, math frac it, and it should end up being a negative 7/12. Okay. And so we can go back to our problem and say that this is equal to x to the negative 7/12. And that's a good answer, except if they asked for no negative exponents, we would say our answer is 1 over x to the positive 7/12. Okay. If they said simplest radical form, we would go one more step and say 1 over radical. X is underneath, 12 is in the crack, and 7 is on the x. And that all three mean exactly the same thing. Okay. All right, number 7. Again, the top has that radical in it, and we can't do much with it unless they're exponents. So we're going to remember what's in the crack, which is the 2, since they didn't write it. And so this will be 2x to the 3/2. On the bottom, we'll keep that x. Okay. Now that we have division, we're going to go ahead and subtract our exponents. And so we have an exponent of 3/2 minus our exponent of, if you need to put it there so you can see it, it's a 1. And when we type it in, it's really just 1.5 minus 1, which is 0.5 or a half. Okay. When we go back, we're going to go ahead and say that this is equal to 2x to the 1/2. And that's a good answer. If they asked for simplest radical, we would keep the 2 here. Okay. X would go underneath. You could put the 2 in the crack if you want. However, you don't need to for a square root, and you don't need the 1 as the exponent either. And so this would be a great answer. Okay. All right, number 8, last one on this page. Looks like the top and the bottom both need some cleaning. So I'm going to say 27 and raise it to the 1/3. And x is going to also get raised to the 1/3. Okay. On the bottom, we're going to keep the 6 there. 2 is in the crack, 1 is on, and so that would be x to the 1/2. All right, on top, 27 to the 1/3, cube root of 27. Not sure if you guys remember that, but that is a nice number of 3. So 27 to the 1/3. If you weren't sure, you could also type it into your calculator, and it's going to give you a 3. X to the 1/3. On the bottom, we're going to keep that 6x to the 1/2. All right, numbers with numbers and letters with letters. So 3 goes into 3 once, 3 goes into 6 twice. Okay. With our exponents, because we are dividing, our exponents will get subtracted. And so we're going to say an exponent of 1/3 minus an exponent of 1/2. Type it right into your calculator. And if it's ugly, hit math frac, and it's going to come out to be negative 1/6. Okay. And so this is going to be x to the negative 1/6 all over that 2 that's left there. Okay. And that's an okay answer. However, if we want to rewrite it without negative exponents, we would have to kick that x to the 1/6 down, and it will go down there with the 2, where it becomes x to the positive 1/6. However, nothing is left on top anymore to hold it down there, and so we can put the 1 on top. Okay. If they wanted it in simplest radical, we would keep the 1 on top, the 2 on the bottom. We draw our radical with x underneath there. 6 is on the bottom, 6 goes in the crack, and you don't need the 1 on there. And that would mean the same exact answer. Okay. Hopefully that helps with some properties of exponents. I know some of them are a little bit tough. We're going to face a few more on the back side. All right, and I'll see you guys in the next video.